Alrighty. 3, 2, 1. Welcome to Grad Chat by PhD Balance, where we talk about topics of grad school that are beyond academic research and that might be more difficult to talk about in our day-to-day life. I'm your host, Niba from Notes by Niba, a multimedia science video producer / host. And this video is being recorded on Ramaytush Ohlone land, also known as San Francisco, California. Please don't forget to subscribe to Grad Chat on your chosen platform to get notifications about our new episode. And if you feel like it, maybe leave us a little rating or a review. Our topic today is being a first-gen Black woman in grad school. So I'm super excited to welcome our guest, Kamille Harris.
Hello.
Thank you so much for being with us here today, Kamille. We really appreciate you being here. Kamille is currently serving as a psychology intern at the University of Memphis Counseling Center, where she provides individual and group psychotherapy, as well as crisis interventions and campus outreach. Before this, she completed her Master's of Science in Clinical Counseling at Radford University and received her Bachelor's of Arts in Psychology at North Carolina A&T State University. And now she's studying Black women's well-being and experiences of gendered racial microaggressions in higher education. Throughout the course of her clinical training, she's provided mental health services to college students, veterans, adults, and children. So this Philadelphia native hopes to spend her career providing clinical supervision, consulting, and developing community-based programs to improve the well-being of adolescent Black girls. Kamille, we are super, super excited to have you on Grad Chat to talk about your experiences.
Super glad to be here.
Awesome. So why don't we dive right in and why don't you tell us about your overall experience in grad school?
So I would definitely say that I've had some ups and downs in grad school, really. I definitely experienced situations where I felt like I wasn't being heard. I definitely experienced situations where I felt like even if the faculty were culturally sensitive and culturally humble, they still didn't understand what it was like to be in my position. No one in my family has gone on to pursue a doctorate. And so the experience in itself is already isolating, when people want to call you and they want to spend hours on the phone and they're like, oh, we haven't heard from you in months. Are you okay? What's going on? And it's like,
they just don't get it, what grad school's like.
You just don't get it. I just don't. And then I don't have time to really explain why the experiences are meaningful, academic hierarchy things. So definitely some ups and downs. And my network is always supportive, but it was definitely a little isolating just in general throughout.
Yeah, for sure. Was your experience in academia like this before you got into grad school? What was your master's and your bachelor's like before this?
So I'm currently in a PsyD counseling psychology program at Radford. So I did my master's there and I just stuck around for my doctorate. But it was completely different than my undergraduate experience. I went to an HBCU for undergrad, which was intentional on my part. And it was the best 4 years of my life. And so it was really, really a culture shock to go from being surrounded by people that look like me, and not even just my colleagues and my peers, but also faculty and staff and those kind of things. And so to be in rural Virginia for so long, it was just kind of
Yeah, I feel you on the culture shock. I similarly went from California to North Carolina and suddenly was like, whoa.
Oh yeah,
so different. Oh boy.
What part of North Carolina?
I was at Duke University in Durham.
Okay.
Yeah.
Greensboro's not that far from Durham.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, so I guess what kind of pushed you to go into grad school after you had completed all of these other degrees? And was there something that you wanted specifically from grad school?
So I pursued the master's because I felt like I wasn't ready for a doctorate straight out of undergrad. I felt like I didn't have enough time to prepare for the GRE. I didn't really know what I wanted to study. People kept talking about grad school as if it was just all about research, know what you want to research. And so I didn't have anyone to really consult with about that other than faculty in my department at A&T. So I did research in undergrad to kind of get me somewhat prepared for grad school. And that was fine. But I knew that if I wanted to be in a position where I could call the shots for myself, I was going to need a doctorate. And so I just did it.
Yeah. Did you always know that you wanted to work in, I guess, like the field of clinical psychology and working with Black women specifically and all these things that you're doing now?
Definitely. I think A&T just kind of solidified it for me a little bit more. And then even as I went through my master's program and I started working in the community and stuff like that, although my clients at the time weren't Black women, it still just kind of helped me shape what I really wanted to do. And so it wasn't really hard for me. I think the turning point might have been at A&T actually when I took a Black psychology class for the first time. And I was just kind of like, okay, yeah, this is it. So.
Yeah. What was it like taking that psychology class? Can you tell me a bit about like your experience there and kind of what pushed you into it?
So the only experience I'd had before that were the other general like core psychology classes and stuff. And it was the first time that I was able to talk about and learn about experiences of Black people in particular. And, I grew up in a neighborhood where there were a lot of Black people, but we were kind of in like a hub within this really white suburban area. So there were a lot of things that were different that I observed then that I wasn't really sure how to articulate until I got to college and got the language for it. But I had always been interested in Black women's experiences. Growing up, I read a lot of Black women's poetry and writing. I wanted to be a journalist. So I did a lot of reading and stuff like that. But so it was just nice to learn about mental health through the lens of Black people in particular, considering the context of our history in America and the oppression that we've experienced. It was just nice to finally have a space to overtly talk about that and feel like it wasn't being ignored.
Yeah. I want to touch on the thing you mentioned recently of like not having the words to describe the experience until you like formally like realize them. I think that's just so powerful because oftentimes it's really hard to find those words and like the best way to articulate it, especially when like words can be so charged and nuanced
Yes.
and the experience can be so nuanced. What was that like to kind of like finally have, I don't know, like a way to say it?
It felt validating. It felt like, okay, what I'm not crazy. Like these experiences were unusual, or these experiences were, a lot for people of this particular age and demographic to be experiencing. Like these are okay. So it felt like it had something, I felt like I had something to back me up, if that made sense.
Yeah,
Um,
that totally makes sense because before that, you're just kind of wondering, like, am I the only one going through
mhm.
this? I don't see it reflected in a lot of places on media or online. Or, yeah, your mention
Yes.
about like, being intimidated by the GRE and how much it is, it's been
Mhm.
shown time and time again to not be a good measure of students. There's a
Yep.
reason that a lot of schools are dropping the GRE, but
Yep.
it's still pretty stupid that they required it to begin with. Sometimes I tell people that I spent $1,000 on grad school applications, including like the GRE test and everything. And I'm like, yeah, that shit it was so expensive. Like,
Yes,
why?
yes, yes, yes. And I knew, and that's also why I said, like, I knew that I wasn't ready to aim for a doctorate because I knew I didn't have the time to study for the GRE and get me in the door. I
Mhm.
didn't really know exactly what I wanted to study. I didn't really have anyone to consult with and be like, hey, what was it like for you applying? What should I like? What do I need to know? So it's different. And I think in talking about the language to talk about my experiences and mental health in the Black community in particular, there's a lot of stigma. People don't talk about those things. There's a lot of stereotypes, and particularly around Black womanhood. You're not allowed to really ask for help. You're not allowed to, that's a sign of weakness and all these other things that are damaging. And it was interesting to grow up like being able to see it and then to finally develop the language and um, like lately has been really nice. To hear people talking about it more now is it's really fulfilling.
Yeah, absolutely. I imagine like, I don't know, are you happy that people are talking about it more? Do you feel like people are talking about it in a way that's like accurate and actually helpful? Like, what are your thoughts on, I guess, current
Hmm.
discourse?
I think it depends on where it's coming from. I think people aspire to be allies in a lot of ways. And I think a lot of times they don't realize that in order to be an ally, sometimes that means you need to step aside. And so I think it depends on who it's coming from. I think a lot of publications and magazines and journals and things are allowing Black women to write about their own experiences, share for themselves what it's like. I know that there's a lot of things going around on social media. There's a lot of Black women in mental health who have, social media pages. Therapy for Black girls is really big.
Mhm.
And so I think there's a lot of resources to get accurate information. So I think, yeah, I think it's an accurate portrayal of what's happening.
Yeah. Okay. That's good to hear. I think sometimes like it can be, I don't know, it might be a little overwhelming to like suddenly have so many things be talked about when like they were ignored before. And there's definitely people who like did not consider it before that are now. And I'm like, please be coming from this from a place of genuine wanting to help and not just like, oh, now the university requires me to do XYZ. So I guess I'll do this. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, there's definitely a disconnect. I think that's a little bit though, what's frustrating is the disconnect between people wanting to talk about it and people throwing around words like, inclusion and equity and diversity and all these things, but they're not actually putting those things into practice. You can't say that you would like more Black women in your organization, but you don't have the resources to support them. And I think the same goes for grad schools and academic programs. You can't recruit students from these quote unquote diverse backgrounds, as you say, but then you don't have any resources to support them. What about students from lower SES? What about students of a particular religious faith or spirituality? What are you going to
Yeah.
do for them? How are you going to support them? Because, that's important for their well-being. And so how are you going to actually put how are you going to apply what you're saying you're so interested in and you're so committed to into practice?
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned, your identities as being both a first generation graduate student, but also being a Black person and also being a woman. How do you feel like this intersectionality kind of like compounds about itself? Because we know that it doesn't just add like 1 + 1 + 1 = 3. It becomes more than that.
Yeah, I think it's impacted me in a lot of ways, especially in doing interpersonal work for a living and having to navigate like clinical supervisors, which is just a completely different experience than like a normal work supervisor. And so navigating I think really communication, how I talk to people, how I'm perceived, and I guess the work that I have to do in order to make sure that I'm perceived the way that I'm intending. I'm aware that I have to work a little harder for that. I'm aware that vulnerability for me has to look a little different in order for me to get what I might need, depending on who I'm talking to. So for example, if I'm, feeling upset about something and I need to confide in a faculty member who's a white woman, she doesn't understand my experience in academia. And so maybe if I'm feeling frustrated about something, even if I feel relatively safe with this person, it still may not be okay for me to demonstrate that I'm frustrated. I need to communicate my frustration a little differently. Maybe I need to say that I'm feeling sad or I'm feeling hurt, but to say I'm upset or something may be a risky thing to do depending on the situation, if that makes sense. And so I think it's impacted my experience in a lot of different ways. But I think coming from a really small doctorate program, I was able to connect with the faculty members individually, and it was really easy for me to determine who to confide in for what, if that makes sense. But I also recognize that a lot of people don't get that experience.
Yeah. No, all that makes sense. I think the interesting part here is that there's this like added burden of having to figure out how to say things because you can't say it the way other people say, and like burden of figuring out who to go to and who's like safe to talk to. um Very relatable on that second front. Like I think everyone has like people that are safe and not safe in academia to talk to, but the range of who that might be definitely changes depending on like who you are and who you're perceived as.
Yes, and who's available. And I think that's also why like representation is so important. But yeah, it is, but it's risky to like figure out who's safe and who's not.
Yeah, absolutely. So if there was anything you could kind of like tell your younger self or do differently when you had started, what would that be?
Hmm. I don't think I'd do anything differently, to be honest. I think I would do everything as I did. I think the biggest challenge I've had to navigate in my doc program has been failing my comprehensive exams. I'd never felt anything in my entire life, ever, never, never. I had never seen less than a C on anything that I've ever submitted in my entire life, uh, in my entire life. And so it was like devastating. I was like, what? But there were a lot of things happening at the same time for me. And I also think that obviously being a Black woman kind of affected those experiences too, in comparison to what my peers were dealing with at the time. I feel like there were some additional pressures on me academically that my peers weren't experiencing. So that obviously interfered with like me being able to study, me being able to prepare. And so after the fact, hindsight's 2020, I realized that at one point my faculty members had called me in for a meeting to basically ask me, well, what are you going to do to make sure that you pass next time? But no one ever asked me why I thought that I didn't in the first place. No one asked me what they could have done better or where they could have supported me more or what I felt like I was missing in order to prepare. And I thought, that's interesting. Like, even though to some degree I felt comfortable and safe with these people, they still, at no point ever acknowledged that they did fail me in some ways. But, things happen. But I think things happened the way that they should. And as much as it sucked, I wouldn't be at my current internship placement, I think, if things had gone differently, and I love it here. So I'm not mad about it.
Yeah, it sounds like kind of finding your way and like who was safe to talk to and the resources that would help you were really instrumental in like kind of improving the overall experience. Can you tell us a little bit about like, I guess, how you found those and like what kind of resources you took advantage of?
Yeah, I leaned on my community a lot. I think I made a lot of really strong connections and friendships in undergrad, and I had a really strong friend group before I even went to college. My family has always been super supportive, and so they do call me if they don't hear from me. Then they, talk to me for hours, and even though I feel like, oh my gosh, I have homework to do, like I can't. It's still really nice to know that they care. So I never felt, even though it was isolating, I never felt alone. And so the people that I also knew who were in grad school at the time, I had a lot of line sisters who were also in school. So we would, lean on each other, FaceTime, text, vent, in audio messages to each other. And so those things were just super helpful. There was also a Black graduate student group chat when I was in Radford. That was really fun. So I wouldn't hang out with them too often, but when I did, it was really fun and it really did help like recharge me. So it did take some work to find those spaces, but I also utilized the networks and friendships that I already had, and just to the degree that they could understand, they tried, and so it
Yeah,
helped.
that's really helpful to have supportive friends and like not be worried about like reaching out to them. I think sometimes we have this sense of like, oh, I shouldn't burden other people with my problems, even though if they're your friends, they're gonna want to know that you're okay. And people who wouldn't want to hear about them, maybe you should consider like not having them in that capacity in your life.
Correct.
Maybe they're just not able to do that, yeah,
Yeah.
did you ever have any, I guess, like kind of like issues or reservations about like reaching out? Was it ever something that you were like, I don't know, kind of hesitant for at any point in your career?
Yeah, there were a lot of things I didn't tell my friends. I don't even think I told them right away that I didn't pass my comps. And there would also be just, day-to-day weird things that like people would say. And it's just kind of like, I talked about it with my classmates. They were a really big, strong source of support for me as well. There were only 3 of us in my cohort, so we were super tight. We kind of had to be. And I think we all got lucky in the sense that we were agreeable to that. Like, no one was purposefully like distant or, oh, I don't want to, I don't want to come out, I don't want to hang out. Like, we all understood we only really have each other, so let's just be friends.
Yeah.
So I definitely though experienced a lot of times where I was like, oh, I probably should call my mom, or oh, I probably should call my friends, and I didn't. um I think I'm just like that. But I think when I felt like I really needed someone to talk to, there was always someone I felt like available.
Yeah, that's really well said. I think it's always really hard to reach out, especially like the like kind of darker of a place you get to mentally, but kind of trying to like at least reach out some of those times, or even like, once in a while, or like schedule things that can be really, really helpful. So can you tell us a little bit about kind of like what you've been up to now? You mentioned like you're really loving this internship that you're currently at and the work that you're doing. I'd love to hear more about it.
Yes, I'm at the University of Memphis Counseling Center for internship right now. In psychology, this is pretty much like the last big step before you head off into a postdoc, if you want to pursue a postdoc. And so, yeah, this is like the last step of our required training, so to speak. So I'm doing some clinical supervision, which has been really fun. It's been really nice to oversee the work of a junior clinician. I think that that's really important work. And so it's weird being in the position of like gatekeeper, but I'm also kind of enjoying that. I mean, this is just what comes with progress and training and growth. So I'm accepting it.
Yeah.
Doing some crisis work, campus outreach, all kinds of things, individual therapy, group therapy. We're running a grad student group this semester. It's not taking off the way that I thought it would. But I'm keeping my
it's hard to
fingers
do it
crossed.
in a group setting. I can understand that. But
I'm
I mean,
keeping my
it's
fingers
always, a learning iterative process.
I'm keeping my fingers crossed. So that's what I'm up to. And then for my postdoc, I accepted a position in Atlanta. So me and my girlfriend will be moving at the end of summer. So
Awesome. Congratulations on the new position. That'll be really exciting. It's nice to have it like kind of like what's going to happen so far from now. So it'll make the move way, way, way easier.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. And I love Memphis, but I'm excited to be in Atlanta, I think. I'm not excited for the traffic. I don't know if you've ever been, but
I've
yeah.
been, the traffic was not pleasant.
So I'm
Yeah.
not looking forward to that, but it should be
Yeah.
a good time.
So I guess like going back to kind of like your work in this counseling center, just like, as we are a mental health kind of organization and you're working in mental health, what would you say are like your top two kind of action items or like things that you would really recommend for people to kind of like upkeep their mental health through grad school?
Through grad school, it's such a unique experience. I think it's really important to know that you're not alone. Grad school in and of itself is isolating. Like undergrad, I'm a social butterfly. I love people. I love to go out. I love to meet people. I love to talk to people. And so undergrad for me, I'm like all over the place and I know everybody. And then grad school, you're in this like little bubble of this little department in this little college. Like, you
Yeah.
don't interact with any of the other grad students really. Like we had a grad student club, but no one had
Yeah.
time. No one has time. No one has time. So know that you're not alone. I think even when you feel like people don't understand, I think it may take some work to find spaces where you can be heard and understood, but they're out there. PhD Balanced out there, Grad Chat. You guys are like, I would have loved to know like these kind of things were going on. For Black women in particular, I found Cohort Sisters, which is really nice. I've never done any of their events, but it's like an online space. There's like a group discussion board and they have like writing virtual sessions and stuff like that. First Gen Docs is another social media platform for grad students. So there are spaces out there. You do have to do some work to find them, but they are there. So I think knowing you're not alone, and I think it's hard. It's hard. And I think one thing that really helped me at some point was realizing that all the work may not get done the way that I want it to, but it'll get done. And that's really, I just have to accept that sometimes. There's never going to be enough time for the things I have to do. And I have to just come to terms with that somehow.
Yeah. I think one of the hard things is kind of like letting go of this idea of like your worth is equivalent to your work, like, failing things or experiments not working or anything like that doesn't make you any less
Yes.
worthy. But it's so hard when like everyone who's been in grad school has like, succeeded academically their whole life. And now for the first
Yes.
time, like, or maybe not for the first time for some people, but now
Yeah.
a lot more than usual, there's a lot of things that aren't going as academically planned.
Yeah, yeah. And a lot of times there's no one to really talk about those things. Depending on the university you're at too, there's a lot of pressure for publications and for grants and all these other things. And it can be really overwhelming sometimes. And so, yeah, I think it's really important to just really keep in mind that you're not alone in these experiences. And there are few spaces where you'll be understood, but they are out there. They are out there. You're not alone. This stuff is really difficult and challenging, but exactly like you said, the work that you do is not equivalent to how valuable you are as a person or anything like that. I remember I put together a pilot study for my dissertation, and I was thinking, oh, I'm gonna have like 3 or 4 focus groups, and it's gonna be great. I'm hoping to have like 8 people in each focus group. It's going to be
Wow,
so,
that's a lot.
right. Like I'm so ambitious, right? Like what? Okay. It ended up being, I think, 1 focus group with like 5 people or something like that, which was still really good. But I was just kind of like, okay, I was a little ambitious about that.
I mean, it was your first time designing something so big, it's hard to know.
Yeah.
The first time I run any experiment, I like allocate 3 times as much time for it because inevitably things get all messed up along the way.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. And it's challenging. You learn as you go. You really do learn as you go. But I would also say in my own research, I've definitely learned that the relationship with your advisor can really, in some ways, make or break your experience too. And so I definitely just want to acknowledge for anyone out there who may be struggling with their dynamic with their advisor, if you are feeling like what is going on right now, that's a very valid experience for the circumstances. It's a very unique relationship. And I think for those who have a great relationship with your advisor, take it to your full advantage, really utilize that relationship and just definitely take some time to appreciate and acknowledge how helpful that is to have throughout this whole process, because that really is the only person who understands.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so like, I don't know, you need to really kind of keep track of who's in your corner and the resources you do have, because sometimes it can just feel like no one is there to help you and you're on your own in this like giant project and no one gets it, which like, yes, that's kind of the point. You're doing unique research, but there are tons of people who can help you with different parts of it. And I don't know, I think finding solutions is something that's kind of hard to figure out. Oftentimes there's resources that we don't even know exist, or the grad school kind of like doesn't publicly acknowledge that they are there, things like that.
Yep. Even like writing resources on campus, things like that. Sometimes you kind of have to dig and search for them. All
Absolutely.
kinds of things. It's really challenging, especially if you're relocating to a new place for grad school, and if you don't know anyone. That also definitely adds a layer to the isolation as well. Even the grad students that I see here in the University of Memphis, we work with a lot of law students, work with a lot of athletes, and the graduate students in particular, international students, they have a really difficult time. And of course now, not so much, well, in some way, well, definitely now traveling. I mean, they can't just up and leave and go visit their families. And so it is really difficult, and finding some network in your program or someone at the university, I think, is important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people really underestimate the moving to a new place, because you might think it's like college where, with undergrad, you like move to a new
Yes.
spot and then you're super social and you have all these groups and different spots and blah, blah, blah. But instead it becomes super isolating, and only having friends within the grad program is really can be kind of difficult. You have to like make sure you have relationships both in and out of it.
Yes. And sometimes people just don't connect, and that's fine. But these are, to some degree, you kind of almost have to make it work, especially if it is a small program, or if it's in an area where you don't know anyone, or maybe you're a person who isn't as extroverted and social. Then it is challenging to make connections, and you do kind of have to make do with what you have sometimes. But if you don't connect with people that are around, then that just exacerbates the isolation as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Finding
Well,
your tribe, I think, is important, I think, for anyone navigating academia, but particularly first gen, particularly Black women, for sure.
yeah, absolutely. Before we finish up, is there anything else that you'd like to mention or talk about?
Um, I'd just like to say best of luck to everyone out there. Keep going. It is difficult. Sometimes it is isolating. But I think as long as you have one or two people that you can kind of talk to and share your experiences with, I think that's good. But the resources are out there, the spaces are out there. What you're experiencing is not unusual, but just keep moving forward. And I also just really hope that at some point these institutions actually do just better at the things that they claim that they're passionate about or committed to. I just hope these initiatives are put into practice.
Yeah, absolutely. We're always hoping for some improvement. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been Grad Chat by PhD Balance. Our episodes are now posted simultaneously on our podcast and our YouTube channel every second Saturday. You can connect with PhD Balance on our website at phdbalance.com or on any social media, Twitter, Instagram at PhD_balance. Until next time, take care of yourself.